Hi, my name is Amanda Hammett, and I'm the host of the Next Generation Rockstars podcast. So today we actually have a special edition for you. For 2020, we decided that we wanted to tackle some of the bigger ideas and concepts in the global workforce, those things that are affecting us every single day that maybe are just below the surface, or maybe things that we just don't think about. So in honor of Women's History Month here in the United States, today's topic is women, particularly women in the intersection of next generation talent. So my guest today is Jeffery Tobias Halter. Now, some of you might be a little surprised because to talk about women, I brought in a man, and that's very true. However, Jeffery is the president of Why Women, and he is a gender strategist. Now, Jeffery didn't just wake up one day and decide, hey, I'm going to be a gender strategist. No, Jeffery actually led Coca-Cola's early initiatives in the diversity and inclusion world back in the early 2000s. So he has a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge in this area. But Jeffery and I took it a little bit further. We brought in both of our worlds, women for him, next generation talent for me, and we talked about the Broken Rung, which was a term coined by the McKinsey study that they put out in late 2019 in conjunction with the Lean In organization. And it was a really fascinating study because all this time we've been talking about the glass ceiling and breaking the glass ceiling for women. But really, we need to address the parity issue at the very beginning in those early career talent issues. And so Jeffery and I spend a lot of time talking about some best practices and things that you can do today to make that happen. So join us, take a look at this interview, and I would love to hear what you have to say about it. Don't forget to share this and comment below. Hi, this is Amanda Hammett, and I'm the host of the Next Generation Rockstars podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. His name is Jeffery Tobias Halter. He is the president of Why Women, and he's a gender strategist. Jeffery, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Thanks for having me on. So basically, my day job focuses on helping companies create end-to-end women's leadership strategies, specifically focused on engaging men in the process, because we're not going to drive long-term systemic change for women without active male engagement.
Exactly. Perfect. That's amazing. And I love that you're doing that. But I would imagine, Jeffery, you didn't just wake up one day and say, I have this great idea. I'm going to do something about this. Or maybe you did. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how did you get started doing that?
Yeah, certainly. So no, if you had told me 20 years ago, this is what I'd be doing, I would have laughed at you. I'm a career sales guy, Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola. And in 1999, I was actually doing a staff rotation assignment. I was working in sales training before I went back out into the field as a regional vice president. And Coca-Cola had a very famous $200 million discrimination lawsuit. We laid off 8,000 people. And overnight, I went from working in sales training to leading the diversity education initiative at the company. Now, my first reaction was, I'm a straight white guy. What do I know about this diversity thing? What meeting did I not attend to get in charge of this? And then the last thing was, I've got 2 young kids. I really need a job. So I'm going to kind of do this diversity thing as long as I can. And so we were charged with training 4,000 people in diversity education. Now realize it's 2,000. And if you've ever seen that episode of The Office with the really bad diversity training, this was kind of my project. And I would sit in this program literally as a hostage, and it's my program. But I heard stories every day, stories of racism and sexism and homophobia from people that I knew and genuinely respected. And I had what they call a white male epiphany. And a white male epiphany occurs when you realize what white male privilege is, and the world revolves around you. We're always the default largest number in most meetings. Our voices are always heard. And at that time, I was not ready to be an advocate. I just chose to get curious. And so I started having conversations. I would go out and talk to women and African-American colleagues. And I would say, hey, I heard this in class. Can you validate, is this true?
Right.
And what happens when you have these genuine conversations, you quickly realize that women and other underrepresented groups are having completely different experiences than I'm experiencing as a white male. And so I chose to get more and more curious. Tom Peters had just come out with Reimagine. It was now 2004, and he was talking about the business case for women. And so this really clicked for me because I had, for a time being, seen diversity and inclusion as kind of a soft HR thing. And what I realized is, in fact, it's a business imperative. Women buy everything in this country, and yet most sales teams are still made up of men. Women are getting more degrees than men are, whether it's bachelor's, master's, PhDs, JDs. And so over the course of the last 20 years, I have evolved to a position now where I consult with Fortune 500 companies and executive teams and work primarily with men on how to move from not just being an ally. I actually think that term is overused nowadays. I think it's kind of soft. Right. We need to move men to advocacy, because I know you've seen the research that says women are under-sponsored and over-mentored. Well, in my mind, this is the same thing. A man mentoring a woman as an ally. And I certainly want to congratulate all the men out there who are allies. We've reached a point in time, 2020, where we need advocates, visible, vocal men, senior leaders demonstrating to the organization why this is important.
I love it. I love that, and I couldn't agree more with everything you said. So you're preaching basically to the choir here. But
of course.
Let's talk for just a second. You and I have had some conversations outside of today, and McKinsey recently put out a study. They annually put out a study on women in the workplace. And they've been partnering with Lean In for quite a while to do this. But the 2019 study was really interesting. And you actually pointed out that it would be a very interesting study in my work as well. And it's specifically talking about that in just above the entry level for women. And actually, I'd like to quote a little something from the intro to this study. So this is the McKinsey Lean In 2019 study on women. An increasing number of companies are seeing the value of having more women in leadership, and they're proving that they can make progress on gender diversity. Still, women continue to be underrepresented at every level. To change the numbers, companies need to focus where the real problem is. We often talk about the, quote, glass ceiling that prevents women from reaching senior leadership positions. In reality, the biggest obstacle that women face is much earlier in the pipeline, at the first step up to manager. Fixing this, quote, broken rung is the key to achieving parity.
Yep.
So let's talk about this broken rung. I think that this is huge, and it is something that really we don't hear a whole lot in the vernacular of the D&I space or just in my everyday work. So what does the broken rung mean exactly? What is that?
Yeah, and this is fascinating. The broken rung basically is that first promotion, whether that's, pardon me, individual contributor to senior individual contributor, team member to team leader. And what's really fascinating is most research, a lot of the McKinsey research, a lot of the Lean In research for years has focused on what we would describe as choke points, which we always thought were director to VP, VP to SVP, SVP to C-suite.
Right.
And what we're finding is, and this is the first time they've actually reported on this, the broken rung exists at that first position. And for every 100 men promoted, 72 women are promoted. 58 women of color are promoted. And so this isn't just a women thing. You've got to look at this intersectionality of race and women to see really gross underrepresentation. And a lot of people might be sitting there thinking, well, that doesn't happen at my company. The McKinsey research is based on 600 multinational companies. So this is very well documented research.
Absolutely.
And then you have to start to unpack what this looks like. Because think about this. Oftentimes, your first promotion in a company comes by another fairly young, possibly not well-trained leader. We tend to focus, I know certainly we did at Coca-Cola, on training directors and sales leaders. And that first level leader gets very little support, gets very little training. And oh, by the way, in 2020, 10 years ago, that person maybe had 7 direct reports. Now they probably have 14 because organizations have been flattening, no support, no training. And now we're asking them to make what seems like a pretty routine decision. We need to promote someone into their first job. And yet they've had no training in how to interview to mitigate unconscious bias. Maybe they aren't aware of concepts like diverse slates, or more importantly, diverse panels. So slates are ensuring you have, a minimum of 1, but ideally 2 to 3 candidates who are women or underrepresented groups. Diverse panels are doing the same thing, because what we're finding is diverse slates don't necessarily work when you as a young female come in and you're faced by 3 older men. And so that's why the interview panel has to also be diverse. And so this one simple thing, picture this. If we promoted women in their first job at the same rate of men, we would have 1 more million women move into leadership in the next 5 years. So we keep thinking this is this huge struggle. And in fact, it starts very early, and we can actually do something about it.
Absolutely. And I'd like to circle back to something you just said about those diverse panels. And so for those of you who aren't aware, Jeffery is also an author. This is his book. It's called Why Women, and it is phenomenal. You can see I have maybe loved it a little too much. But I actually went through and I was thinking about this very thing going into our conversation. And here's something that I highlighted. I'd like for you to talk about. Many hiring managers often have a preconceived notation of what they're looking for. Someone who fits their definition of leadership, which is most often based on a traditional male model of leadership. I mean, and that is so interesting, because we don't think of it that way. Like, this is just leadership, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'll give you, and I can certainly share this with you on your website. So I do a training activity, and I list 30 words associated with management. And we ask people to just check off their top 10 words they would associate with managers. So you check them off, no big deal. This is what makes a good manager. And then I asked them to put a gender to that word. Now, it would be easy to say, these terms are genderless, but I don't let them do that. You've got to pick the first one that pops in your mind. And what we find out is, and this is based on a Google study of 80,000 leaders. And what we find is that 2/3 as many words are associated with men as with women. The words much stronger, things like analytical, risk taker, assertive. The women words much softer, much as you would imagine. And then they were asked, when you think of a leader, how do you rank these words? And instead of 2/3, 4/5 of the words, 80% were associated with men, only 20% were associated with women. So this is a great, simple exercise.
Right.
And here's one more caveat on this. The New York Times in November of last year did an article, and they asked 5th grade girls to draw pictures of leaders. And literally every little girl drew a picture of a man. And so what it says is this predisposition starts very young. And so it's not just men who are thinking that leaders are men. Do women also carry an unconscious bias? And so this is just one element of what do we think a leader is. And in my book, I talk about the double bind dilemma. And this is so critical, particularly for men to understand when you're interviewing women, because women face a double bind dilemma. So,
Okay.
Amanda, if you're too tough, you know what you're called.
Yes, I do.
And if you're too soft, you know what you're called.
Yes.
You're never just right. It's the Goldilocks effect. Men, if you think about a continuum, where assertiveness is at the one end. Men can be 90% profanity using, pounding the table, aggressive, to down at 10% quiet, introvert, finance oriented, but they're still respected as leaders. I don't have research on this, but I believe women fall into about a 45 to 55% narrow band where, you're not too assertive, you're not too soft, you're just right.
Yes.
And so it's a tightrope. It's a huge tightrope. And when we're evaluating talent, or more importantly, the performance reviews leading up to you being promoted, so assertive is a great word, or aggressive or emotional. Women are often called emotional. And that's everything from raising your voice. Oh, by the way, men raise their voice and no one judges them on it.
Nope.
Many times women are raising their voice because they're not being heard or they're being ignored in a meeting. And I interpret that as, oh, she's so emotional about this. Whereas when Ron pounds his fist and drops an F-bomb, it's no big deal. And so these little subtle things really factor in. And then I'll put one more out there. And it's really a tendency to see ourselves or someone like us in that candidate. This is a huge blind spot for companies who tend to recruit at the same schools. When someone walks in the door, if I went to Georgia Tech and you went to Georgia Tech, does that just raise you up a notch, in my eyes? Certainly. Right. Certainly. Do I, and this is a common one for men, do I see myself in you 30 years ago when I was starting out? And so that's much harder for me to look at a young woman and say, well, gosh, can she really do this? So all of these biases are critical. And so smart companies implement, programmatic elements to eliminate some of these, but none of it makes it back down, just going full circle down to that first level manager doing the first rounds of interview. And so I've got one simple solution. Doesn't cost any money. Every time you have that first level interview, right, I want the manager's manager to just ask a question. Okay. How many women do you have on the slate? And if the answer is none, then you have a responsibility to look that manager in the eye and say, what are you doing to get some ready? And what are we going to do next time? Absolutely. Because it's just not acceptable that you don't have any women ready. And oh, by the way, that simple question needs to be asked at every level of leadership, because I've seen it in the C-suite where an EVP job comes open and we're sitting in talent review and Jim puts forward the same 3 guys he's put up before.
Yep.
And then the CEO never looks at Jim and says, okay, I'm giving you a pass this time, but what are you doing to get a woman ready?
Yeah.
And that simple question is never asked, and it drives me crazy.
Absolutely. And you are so right. It starts so early. This is actually something that I have ongoing conversations with teams about. So in our company, we do something called the collision course, and it's the collision between leadership and next gen talent. And there are various points along the way. And this is something that I'm always asking, these frontline leaders, are they ready and are they willing to help identify? What are you doing to identify these next leaders? And the question is always met with deer in the headlights, like, because
Absolutely.
there is no process, and the process that they do have is inherently flawed. So.
And, and being a generational expert, this, I was raised in an era of command and control.
Yeah.
In the 90s, it was very easy to be a leader and a manager. Mm-hmm. Today, I need to manage Amanda differently than I manage Jim and Terry and Monica. Mm-hmm. And that takes a high degree of skill. And it takes so much more time and so much more investment, but it goes full circle to what do millennials want? What do Gen Z want? They want feedback. They want challenge. And oh, by the way, they may lead differently than you.
Yes.
But that's okay. You got to give them a chance. And oh, by the way, they're going to make mistakes. Well, you know what? We made mistakes too.
Yes, it seems like that idea of mistakes is just like, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what would be your suggestion for a company that is they're really struggling at this first frontline level of preparing women, especially those early in career women, to get up to that first level of frontline leadership? What would you suggest to them?
I think it's important to have programs and processes. This is where HR meets the business. Yeah. And you've got to have leaders understanding the purpose behind the HR programs and accountability. And the accountability being the big one. And again, I'll share this with you for your reader or watchers on the website. But there are 10 things we need to hold leaders accountable in this space, and this is huge. This came out of a McKinsey study, Delivering Through Diversity, but it's just as powerful. 86% of companies say they can articulate the business case, but only 16% hold people accountable. Yes. And so, I was in sales for 20 years, and I had a quota every quarter that if I didn't meet, I would be replaced. Mm-hmm. We talk about setting goals and metrics for women in leadership, and immediately we go, oh, no, we can't count that. We can't track that. We track everything in business. You have to track it. Yeah. And so it goes back to holding people accountable for some of the things we talked about already. Diverse slates, diverse panels, regrettable losses is a big one. How are you identifying top talent? This whole notion of my big point is having a conversation on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis about our differences. And that's as simple as this. We all work really hard, but we really don't have time to understand each other. And it goes back to my very first premise around how I came to do this work. And so what I encourage organizations to do, and you can do this at every level, is pull something out of the newspaper, watch a YouTube video, watch a TED Talk, and then just talk about it. We're in the middle of Black History Month. We're going to have Women's History Month next month. Watch a video and then just talk about the concepts. I know we're focused on millennials and women. One of the best things I've ever seen is called The American Son. It's a stage play that's now on Netflix, and it stars Kerry Washington. And it's fabulous to show at a team meeting to start a conversation around race and, quite frankly, the things we don't understand about race. But there's great movies for women. Misrepresentation is another one, but they don't have to be big. Once a week, USA Today publishes at least 2 or 3 articles on women or millennials, and so just read the article and talk about it.
Yeah.
So those are just some of the things I think companies can do.
Absolutely. I think just opening up those lines of communication is a basic first level step that's free, and it can it's amazing what it can bring out of it. Not just seeing people's different perspectives, but also building trust and building those foundational items that you need for a team.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So. All right. Well, Jeffrey, this has been really enlightening and eye-opening. Where can my audience find you?
Yeah. So www.y, the letter Y, women.biz, the Y being the Y chromosome, pretty easy to manage and understand. But please go out to my website. I have free white papers. I have a free assessment your leaders can take. One is called a gender advocate profile, and one is called a male advocate profile. And it has 20 questions that cause you to think about how you become an advocate, but more importantly, the 10 steps and actions you can take to become an activist or an advocate. And so just go out and look around. I've got all kinds of free materials, and I would love to continue this conversation.
Absolutely. And also another plug for the book. If you
buy the book, sure.
Get a copy of this book. You can mark up your own copy and highlight your own copy. But again, Jeffrey, thank you so much for being here, for sharing with us and enlightening all of us. Your work is phenomenal, and I am a big fan. So again, thank you to the audience for sharing your time with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the Next Generation Rockstars, where we have discussed all about recruiting and retaining that next generation of talent. So I'm guessing that you probably learned a tremendous amount from this week's Rockstar leader. And if that is the case, don't keep me a secret. Share this episode with the world, but really share it with your friends, with your colleagues, because they also need to learn how to recruit and retain this next generation of talent, because these skills are crucial to business success moving forward. Now, of course, I want you to keep up to date every single week as we are dropping each and every episode. So be sure to subscribe to your favorite podcast platform of your choice, and you will see the Next Generation Rockstars show up just for you.